At Subway, start your day the flavorful way by adding new guacamole to your favorite breakfast sandwich. Perfectly made with a hint of jalapeno, our guacamole turns up the flavor to your breakfast. Try it today on a hot and toasty egg, white, and cheese. Subway, eat fresh.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects. The BS Report. The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. This is part 3 of our Friday extravaganza. Miami and Indiana, Game 6 coming up tonight, 8:30 ESPN, 7:30 NBA Countdown, 1 hour. If you missed part 1 of the podcast, Dave Damashek and Jimmy Kimmel talking about whether the Clippers should change their name. Part 2, Ramona Shelburne talking about how crazy this story was. She was reporting it from beginning to end, and it's probably not over. And now part 3, Zach Lowe from Grantland. Haven't had him on in a while. We spent some time together last weekend, so I feel like we did a podcast, but we just didn't tape it. And now we're going to actually do one for the American public. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, we spent some quality time in Miami, where I assume you are now.
I am back in Miami. I thought I was going to be in L.A. I was a Chris Bosh corner 3 or a Chris Bosh fake the corner 3 dish to a wide-open Ray Allen who would have made that shot 100 times out of 100, and then I'm home in L.A., but instead I'm in Miami. You were okay. You're okay with LeBron passing, right? It was the right play.
I didn't even think about it, honestly. Watching the game, it didn't cross my mind that we were going to be sucked back into the 2011 vortex of, is LeBron clutch? Does he have the clutch gene? Does he pass too much? It was a fine play. It would have been a very tough finish over Hibbert. And honestly, look, that's the ultimate hypocrisy here. If Bosh makes that shot, LeBron is a hero for making the right play. And you can't have it both ways. You can't laud him for being a hero, which a lot of the critics would have and did when Bosh made that exact shot against Brooklyn. And then if Bosh misses, say that he's weak. You can't do that. It's one or the other.
Well, and also, LeBron was off that whole game. Even before he got in foul trouble, we were watching it going, not the LeBron game I was expecting. Not a go for the jugular type performance. He just seemed off. The foul trouble knocked him out completely. And even when he came back in the fourth quarter, he wasn't LeBron. Like, he was constantly thinking about or worrying about getting that sixth foul. And I think when you get in that mindset, you get a little hot potato-y. There are a couple of times he was going to the basket, and you could see his brain calculating the charge chances, and it changed the decisions he made. So to just expect him to turn that off and just be like, all right, this play, now I'm going to be super aggressive, and I'm going to dunk over 3 people, not realistic. I also thought the most fascinating thing to me about that play was Vogel last year gets roasted for not having Hibbert in the game and LeBron dunks, right? And the reason he didn't have Hibbert in the game because it would have been so hard for Hibbert to jump back out on Bosh, and which is the reason he took him out. He wanted to make sure he had people fast enough to go jump out on Bosh. This time around, he keeps Hibbert in. Hibbert's not fast enough to jump out on Bosh, so it was the reverse of what would have happened last year, except Bosh missed it. So didn't you think that was kind of cool that it kind of went full circle, though?
Yeah, and I think that, the Vogel thing is funny. I mean, he vowed that he would never do that again, and I think you saw why. I mean, as good a look as Bosh had, you still take the 33% corner look over the absolute, 80% LeBron trying to make a layup when Roy Hibbert is not in the game.
Yes.
Yeah, the whole. I'm so sick of talking about whether LeBron is clutch, and I thought we were done with that, but it was fun game.
I just think he's a genius, and he calculates the right decision 98% of the time, and he calculated all the different things in his brain at 1,000,000 miles a second, and the right play was to pass to Bosh. And actually, if Bosh swung it to Ray Allen, they're resting right now, waiting for the finals. We're taping this right now. It is 1:47 East Coast time. So do we think LeBron James comes out with a little burr in his saddle tonight?
I don't think he's going to get 5 fouls in 24 minutes, let's put it that way. Or less than 24. He got 5 fouls in like 18 minutes or something. Yeah, he'll play well. The Heat will play well. I will be shocked if Indy sent – I mean, look, they barely won at home with LeBron in foul trouble. And there were some crazy things that happened for both teams. Like Wade's hitting three-pointers again now? Like, what's going on? But, yeah, I think it closes out tonight.
I thought the most – we're going to talk about this on the show tonight. I was really fascinated by Paul George's game and what it was like to see him at 2 guard, what it did to Wade, what it did for Paul George offensively not to have to guard LeBron and put all those defensive miles on him during the game, and just how he kind of swallowed up Wade. I mean, really, the reason Wade was shooting those threes was because he wasn't getting any other type of shot in that game, because Paul George was just like, you're not scoring on me. And then in the other end, he was doing whatever he wanted because they couldn't put LeBron on him because of the foul trouble. And it made me think, like, the closest analogy to him offensively in that game was T-Mac. And you think, like, he's 6'8", T-Mac's 6'8". Their size and athleticism was what made T-Mac so special. The 3-point range. Is Paul George a two guard?
I don't know how much that conversation matters, right? I mean, like, he's a wing, and the two guard is a wing, and the small forward is a wing. It matters more on defense, and that's why I think he'll always be more of a three, just because he's big enough to guard opposing threes. And depending on who's on the team with him, like if Lance leaves in free agency, which I don't think is going to happen, and they replace him with sort of a smaller point shooting guard without the same length, then Paul George can't really shift over to that position. I think that mixing and matching has become so common. I don't really distinguish between the positions, but yeah, I mean, look, Lance is a tough physical dude who guarded LeBron last year pretty well in a couple of games where Paul George got into foul trouble. I mean, that's, if it works, and maybe the only way it works is you save some mileage on Paul George, or in transition they can't switch the matchup so that LeBron can find Paul George and he has weight on him instead. It's worth looking at, or at least not being so sort of fiercely loyal to each matchup.
Well, Doug Collins was saying this a couple games ago when Dwayne Wade really played well in the first couple games, and he was saying, man, what if they put Paul George on Wade? What if you just take Wade out? Let LeBron have his 35 or whatever. LeBron doesn't have the type of personality that he's going to shoot 29 times. Just take Wade out of the equation. This is what you and I were emailing the other day about whether it made sense for San Antonio to put Kawhi and Russell Westbrook. Just let Durant do what he's going to do. But if you take out Westbrook, you're going to beat them. And I wonder, like, watching how easily Paul George guarded Dwayne Wade, I think that's what Indiana does tonight, because it wasn't just the fact that he shut down Wade. It was the fact that he was able to save that extra energy for offense, and it really helped them. And he had a historically great game in the second half. But I do wonder if that's the strategy. I was stunned by how old Wade looked in that game, and how little answer he had against Paul George.
Well, and Wade's not as good a shooter as LeBron, and Paul George has had little blips of weirdly bad defense for him off the ball in this series, losing shooters who are at least threatening from 3-point ranges, and not a lot of them, but enough where it's like, is he really fully engaged? And Wade, although he's a good cutter and all that, is not, these 3-pointers aside, is not really going to hurt you.
No.
As a jump shooter. So I think they'll revisit it tonight, and it might just be a matter of, sometimes defense is easier when it's just guard the guy closest to you. The Heat do this all the time, right? Their matchups on the perimeter switch. Sometimes they focus more, sometimes they don't. But sometimes Chalmers will just guard a wing for no reason other than that he's close by, and they'll try and switch later in the position. And sometimes it's just easier in transition to just say, just don't worry about it. Just take the guy closest to you that's similar in size and just go from there.
One last point, because by the time most people hear this podcast, this game might have been played, so I don't want to belabor it too much. But you wrote a piece last year for Grantland about the Kawhi Leonard George Hill trade and just the fascinating behind-the-scenes decision-making that led to it. And I think it's pretty fair to say San Antonio won that trade, although you can't blame Indiana. Nobody knew Kawhi was going to be as good as he is. Did make me think, though, had they just taken Kawhi Leonard and you had him and Paul George together, and you were able to play Paul George at two guard all the time but have Kawhi handle the threes, that's a whole different ceiling for this Pacers run, I feel like, don't you?
Yeah, that's a counterfactual I've had with a lot of front office people, especially after I wrote that piece. And it's terrifying to think about what their defense would look like with those two guys on the wing. And look, George Hill's a nice player. He fits what they want to do offensively kind of well, and that sounds weird because they don't really do anything offensively kind of well. But he does. He's not intrusive, and he's a solid defender. He's big. He's long for the position, etc. But you can find 80% of George Hill for much cheaper than they're paying. And
every
Kawhi
year.
Leonard, and Kawhi Leonard, I wrote this I was gentle in the piece because, Kawhi was just in his second season, but I wrote that the deal is probably going to end up a win for San Antonio. And I should have been more emphatic than that because I felt that way at the time. And there's no question that the Spurs are going to win that deal. Kawhi Leonard is awesome. And although he needs to develop a little bit offensively, he's going to be really, really good. And the thought that pair on the wing in Indiana, that is terrifying with Hibbert behind them. Oh, my God.
Well, it's a little bit of a parallel to the Harden trade, right, where they kind of misevaluated the player a little bit. I don't think they ever thought Kawhi was going to be that good. And like with Oklahoma City, as you wrote in the piece you did this week about kind of looking at that trade a year and a half later or whatever it's been, Oklahoma City clearly didn't think Harden was going to be that good, and that was part of the reason they traded him. I think if Indiana had really thought it through in a way, from a standpoint of Kawhi Leonard has a chance to be this, then I think they keep him. And I think they just say, you know what, we'll take our chances because potentially this could be a Pippen Jordan situation athletically and defensively with these two guys, or like T-Mac and if you'd put T-Mac and Grant Hill, if Grant Hill had never gotten hurt, that would be the other parallel, I think. And I just don't think they evaluated him like that.
Well, I remember talking to David Morway, who was the Pacers. I don't know what the hell his title was with the Pacers, GM, assistant GM at the time. Kawhi was on their list. Like, that's the guy I think that they would have picked had they kept the pick. They wanted to make it clear that they liked Kawhi. Maybe they're just fighting the perception that they misevaluated him, but I believe him. But he was on their list, and they ended up going for George Hill. But that's the other. Here's the other interesting variable with that trade. Not to get sidetracked, but part of the appeal of George Hill to them was in the end stages of rebuilding the Pacers brand after the Malice in the Palace. They liked that he was a local kid. He's a Huey Pewee kid. Yep. He's from Indianapolis. Like, that mattered to them. And that always makes me nervous when you start factoring in stuff like that. Character is one thing, but like local appeal and those kind of variables, that makes me nervous when they start factoring into the equation.
Yeah, you know what works locally when you appear in the finals every year? That always seems to sway the locals. But you're right. Like when you go to those Indiana games, they by the way might have the best intros of any team. I don't like the video starting five intros. I just wish they announced the players. I don't like watching the 2-minute video beforehand. It's just like seems very cookie cutter generic to me. But Indiana has a really good set of intros, and they say something about each player right before, and for him they call him the local kid or the local hero. I think they call him the local hero.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. The local hero, George Hill. So they definitely play that up with him, and I think you're right. That was a big part. We also saw that in Portland in 2005 when they traded down for the number 3 pick. They could have had Chris Paul or Darren Williams, and they took Martell Webster because they wanted a quote-unquote good kid. And they liked him. And it wasn't he from Washington? Like he was Pacific Northwest.
Yeah,
And it was all the same reasons, right? They just wanted a good local kid because that would be important to the fans. You know what the fans would have really liked? Chris Paul. I bet they would have liked for Chris Paul the last 9 years.
And in Indiana's defense, they're in the conference finals for the second year in a row, and
yes.
they have Lance Stephenson. So it's not as if this turned out horribly for them.
No, it's not a failure. It's just Kawhi's better than I think anyone thought. I didn't watch that draft and think everybody blew it with Kawhi Leonard, Like when he went 15, it seemed 5 or 6 picks lower than what he should have gone for just because he was projected in like the 8 to 10 range. But I don't think anybody thought it was like when Paul Pierce dropped to the Celtics or anything like that, where it was just like, what the hell just happened? Last thing on Indiana. Let's say they lose tonight. Now what? Now it happens. They're at like $60 million just in the committed salaries next year, assuming they bought out Scola. If they don't, they're at 64. The salary cap's 63. The luxury tax is 77. So if they let Lance go, it's not like they could replace him. It makes the most sense to bring him back, but at what price? You certainly don't want to get him a long-term contract. He's a maniac. And really, they're not David West. They can't trade. He's the heart and soul of the team. They're not going to trade Paul George. Paul George has an All-NBA salary bump coming up that's going to push them closer to the tax. George Hill is untradeable at his contract. He makes $8 million a year for the next 3. The only quote-unquote tradable guy that maybe makes sense is Roy Hibbert, $14.9 million next year, and I think the final year of his deal is in the 15s. A, is he tradable? B, would you trade him?
Of course he's tradable. Anyone's tradable, even George Hill, and it's just a matter of what you're willing to take back. And if you find, like, George Hill is an interesting question for all the reasons we just talked about. What if you can find someone else on a long-term contract that the other team doesn't want, but that fits your team better, and then you just get the next C.J. Watson or whatever. Actually, C.J. Watson's on the team next year, guaranteed, so you just make him the starting point guard. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. But, yeah, Roy's tradable. That last year on his contract is a player option in 15-16, so he could – depending on how he plays next season, opt out of it and become a free agent. So you're not on the books for it for a very long time. But, like, Roy has been a punching bag for 3 months, and he scored 0 points in Game 4 of this series, and he scored 0 points through other games. He's also had, particularly sort of midway through that Washington series, woke up and has been a really impactful player for 80% of their games. Now, you don't want to say that's great that a $15 million player is impactful in 80% of your games. It should be 100% at this stage. But, like, it's not as if good Roy Hibbert has vanished from the face of the earth completely. He's had big games and big moments, and he's a force near the rim. And it wasn't long ago when I was talking to GMs, it was 4 months ago, saying, oh my God, the value of Roy Hibbert's rim protection. Like, he really, if you use our metrics, he's a $25 million player based on his defense alone. So I think you end up keeping him. You count on his mental state rebounding in some way, and then you deal with Lance. And, as you say, Lance is a fascinating free agent. The safe bet is that the same band comes back together, but you do have to look in the mirror, and Larry and Donnie Walsh especially are unafraid of big change, right? I mean, you know that. We all know that. They have to look in the mirror, depending on what happens with Miami, and say, maybe we just can't beat this team. Maybe they're too good for us. And that seems weird to say because George, Hibbert, and Stephenson are all very young, but it's like maybe 4-7 against the healthy Heat is too much to ask.
I hate to do this to you. You hate the trade machine.
I love the trade machine.
You love the trade machine, but you're also Spock, and I throw crazy trades at you, and you have to do the Spock thing. So I'm going to throw this at you.
I'm excited now.
Indiana and New York. Tyson Chandler expiring deal. Ray Felton they want to get rid of. J.R. Smith they want to get rid of. That's on one side. Roy Hibbert, George Hill, Lance Stephenson sign and trade on the other side. Am I crazy to think they're like a weird match? You also have the Brogdoni expiring?
I think throwing Stephenson in is just Stephenson and Hibbert. I mean, Hill is fine. Stephenson and Hibbert are young. Stephenson is very young. I think that's a lot to give up for a year of Tyson Chandler. I mean, it would put them into full rebuild mode, but and J.R. Smith, the Pacers are not. The Pacers are not touching JRs. It would put them into full rebuild mode in that Chandler expires. Felton and J.R. Smith are not. They would still be okay with George and Chandler. They'd be a good team. Long term, it would make them a lot more flexible. Is all that I meant. The Pacers are not touching J.R. Smith with a 10-foot pole.
What about Tyson and J.R. Smith for Hibbert and Lance sign and trade?
No. It's too much. Hibbert and Lance are quality players. Tyson is an expiring contract. You don't know, and he's over 30. And JR's toxic, man. Nobody wants J.R. Smith. He's toxic. Not even because of the money he makes, but the money combined with the antics, combined with the fact that he sucked for most of last year. It's going to be hard to trade. I mean, there are 25 teams in the league who just would not have him on the team, period, at any cost. And so you're already dealing with a limited market. So I'm nixing that one. I think it's an interesting idea. Particularly if they've come to the conclusion internally that they just don't want Lance, but I don't think they're close to that point.
You know why I came up with all those ideas? I just love the thought of Lance Stephenson and J.R. Smith in the same trade. You're right. It doesn't totally make sense for the Knicks, but for the Pacers. But just the thought of those two people in the trade and seeing the Sports Center thing, like two of the craziest people in the league, and kind of like presents the same, like Lance presents the same types of problems right now for the Pacers that J.R. Smith did last year. J.R. Smith, great season last year. Well, he self-destructed a little in the playoffs, but man, he's such a good shooter, and wow, you can't lose him for nothing. And now all of a sudden you've talked yourself into a 3-year deal for him. I feel like the Pacers are in that same spot with Lance. And I think you weren't there the other night, but what Lance was doing in that game was really on the line. I mean, it was. I hate to use this word lightly, but I'm going to use it anyway. It was a little Artestian. Like, I really felt like it was going to generate into something bad. That was the kind of the weird anger and passion that he was playing with. It was like he wanted to start something. And I was concerned watching it. I was like, I really hope this doesn't blow up into something really awful. That was the energy he had in that game.
It was so bad that you saw this, I'm sure. The Legend sent a text message to a USA Today reporter confirming that he was upset by the antics. And the Legend doesn't like to talk publicly unless it's a major concern for him. So it was ugly.
Yeah. And also, terrible job by the refs. I mean, a couple of the LeBron fouls were awful. That was one thing, but Lance was really straddling the line and kind of stepping over it. And at some point, even like when LeBron's trying to run up court and he's running in front of him and just kind of invading his personal space, not technically a foul, but kind of is, and it's not sportsmanlike. And there's a difference between gamesmanship and just, as Ray Allen said, being a buffoon. And at some point, the refs just have to pull Vogel and Lance over back. Look, we haven't called anything yet, but starting right now, we're going to. So he can keep doing this, but we're going to start calling him for fouls and technicals starting right now. So stop it. And they didn't. They never stopped it. And it was starting to it was like a snowball rolling down the hill. And I really felt like there was going to be an incident, and there wasn't, fortunately.
Well, that's the Heat are too smart to get lured into that. I mean, and I think that's why this has been the overplayed story of the series. As soon as Lance said it's a sign of weakness that LeBron engaged me in trash talk, that was like 50% of the questions that anyone in the series got were about that quote for the next 2 days. And it's like, the Heat just don't care. I mean, the Heat have won they've been in 3 finals. They've seen other weird players come and go. Like, this is not important to them. But I agree with you. They need to get him under control. But look, he's playoffs, 14 points a game, 7 boards, 4.5 assists. He's 23 years old, and he's unrestricted. Players that good at a position where there are no good players anymore. I mean, the shooting guard position we've talked about is so weak. And players that are 23 and really good don't become unrestricted free agents hardly ever. And that's why I can't wait for his free agency, because I want to see who the team is. And I don't even know if there will be one. I want to see who the team is that's confident enough in themselves and almost crazy enough to be like, 4 years, $45 million, Lance Stephenson. We are all in. I don't care. And look, we've talked about this in Miami. I haven't found that team yet. Every team that I've talked to, every team I talk to is like, no way. We don't know how he's going to be outside of the Larry Bird, Indiana cocoon. We're scared crapless of him. I want to see the team. I want there to be one team who's like, you know what? 23 years old, position of need. We're all in. I don't think we're going to see it. I think Indiana's going to get him back on a decent deal.
I just want to clarify. I didn't think anyone in Miami was going to punch Lance. What I was worried about was, you forget how the Artest melee started. It started because Ron Artest gave a crazy hard foul that was totally unwarranted to Ben Wallace in a game that was over. That Indiana was already up by 9 points with like 50 seconds left. And for whatever reason, he decided that was the time to really, really hammer Ben Wallace on a foul. And Ben Wallace lost his shit. That's what I was worried about with Lance. I thought he was going to do something in that game that was going to cross the line. And it's sometimes guys just get that look and you see it, and it's like the lights are on, but nobody is home, and he gets himself so charged up sometimes. On the other hand, I thought he really affected the game positively for Indiana because they didn't have an incident, and I thought he affected Wade a little bit. I thought he was bullying Wade a little bit. I've never seen anybody treat Wade like that. LeBron laughs that stuff up, but I thought he affected Wade a little bit. And it's going to be interesting to see if he tries to keep that going in Game 6. A, the refs are going to be looking for it. B, the crowd is going to be – the Miami crowds are pretty good. You saw it last weekend. I got to say, after 4 years of going to their playoff games, I don't know. The reps have helped them. It's an influential crowd, especially with the late start. Everybody has some drinks. Like, do you agree that I think they have a pretty good home crowd?
Really good crowd. I had not been to a game in Miami in a long time for whatever reason, and that was I think the late start helps, right? Because they're a legendarily late arriving crowd, and they were loud. I mean, that was a loud crowd. The one thing I will say, I like a lot of their production values, and I wrote about this. I like their, a lot of their starting lineup intros and the music they play. They have their PA announcer he says the Indiana starting lineup so fast. It's like number 1, Lance Stephenson, number 3, George Hill, number 55, Roy Hibbert. They don't even have time to do a thing where they walk out one by one and high five.
Gamesmanship.
Every team deserves the walkout. I don't care if you're on the road and you're hated. You got to give me that moment. I want to walk out. He's just they don't. So the Pacers players literally just stand there. They don't even form a line. I like the theater of starting lineup intros. I want the theater for both teams.
Quickly, Miami wins tonight. Yes or no?
Yes.
I think so too. I'd be absolutely astounded if Miami lost tonight. The only thing that worries me for Miami is that Dwayne Wade, the miles he put on in game 5, 40 minutes, just a brutal matchup with Paul George. Wade, you think about Wade, and it's just he gets to play 54 games a year. He's guarded by the second best wing defender on the other team every game. Kind of gets to pick his spots. That game reinforced to me how great of a situation he has with LeBron. He can just pick his spots. He doesn't have to be Tony Soprano. He could just be Christopher or Paulie Walnuts. Just kind of come in and out. I don't need to be in this episode. You take it.
The only thing that worries me is that in 2 of the last 3 games of the series, so I think games 3 and 5, the Pacers. No, maybe it's not just 2. Maybe it's just the last game. The Pacers in the last game killed Miami on the offensive glass and finally looked like the team that I thought had a chance in the series. Roy Hibbert had a couple of rebounds where he just destroyed Bosh. David West had a couple of rebounds where he destroyed his guy. And I'm like, that's the team. That's the team I thought would make this a 6 or 7 game series. And I hadn't seen that team yet.
It's interesting. I don't know how much they played it in TV, but just being there in person, West was just throwing guys around for the rebounds. And I think they called it once the whole game where he was going in, whether it was Rashard Lewis or Battier, whoever, the ball would go up and West would just take whoever was in front of him and throw him out of the way. And the refs weren't calling it ever. They were really physically imposing. And I agree with you. I thought from just around the paint and the rebounds around the rim seemed like the physically imposing Pacers team we'd kind of been waiting for. And Hibbert got the biggest rebound in that game when George missed that 3-up-1. Hibbert came flying in, got a one-handed, kind of uncoordinated, but kind of secretly coordinated rebound, saved it, set up the second Paul George 3. I thought he played pretty well. I'll be interested to see who trades for him this summer if that's what they decide to do, because there is could they do Jeff Green and the Bogans contract for Hibbert?
Ooh. I can't. You're taking me down the Hibbert trade rabbit hole. I just don't think it's going to happen. But that's, Jeff Green. The Celtics want a center. They flirted around the Asik trade talks right toward the end. I mean, we'll see who they draft, I guess, right? I mean, that's what so much of this is sort of. We're in a strange situation where A, the draft has to unfold, and B, if you're Indiana, you have to see what happens with Miami a little bit, right? I mean, you have to see, do they all re-up? Do 2 of them leave? I mean, I'm assuming now they're all going to re-up because it looks like they're going to make the finals. And Bosh has said publicly that he wants to be back. But you have to see, right? I mean, you have to check. If they fall apart, you have to be like, oh, we definitely bring the whole band back together then. Yeah,
and I also think, the Carmelo is still sitting there for Miami. It's not inconceivable. It's really not. You could rig it so Bosh already said he'd take less money to stay, and I think they're going to tell him what the price is. Here's the price. You can either opt in for that $20 million and we're going to get rid of you as soon as that contract's up, or you could stick around and we'll give you 4 years for 62. And the first year is worth this. So now you're dropping his salary. Now it's Wade, same thing. All right, we both know your game's breaking down. We'll give you 5 years for 70. Or you can opt in your next 2 and we're going to let you go at the end of it. And there's no way you're making up that $30 million everywhere else. And what if your knee gets hurt? So now he's in. So now you have those 2 guys in for $26 million next year combined. Then you go to LeBron. Hey, LeBron, what can we do here? Now all of a sudden you have a chance to get Carmelo Anthony. Like, it's not inconceivable. They could rig it. And then Carmelo would be in that dream team situation where you just be like, hey, Carmelo, you're just going to have wide open 22-footers for your entire career. It's just good luck.
Look, it's amazing the degree to which Miami has shut this story down all season because it should be the biggest story in the league. What is the Heat going to do? And I think part of the reason it's shut down is that they're so good that everyone just assumed they would make the finals, or once Indiana started falling apart anyway, that they would make the finals. And so do you really break up a finals team? But look, they are, it all sounds ridiculous that they could add Melo to those three, and probably they can't. But this is not a team that thinks small. I mean, this is not. They're thinking everything, right? I know they have their eye on 8 or 9 minimum salary guys that they think are good, or like mid-level guys, but that's not all they have. It's not like they're putting all their resources into that. They are a think big team. They don't think anything is out of reach for them, and who knows what plans they've got. But I'm telling you, they have plans. Somewhere they have a couple of big blockbuster plans that they probably won't execute, but they're ready to try.
And we both think LeBron definitely comes back. Neither of us think he goes to Cleveland. And we think he's bought into the Miami Mafia, and as Jalen affectionately calls Riley and Mickey Harrison and Nick Harrison and Alonzo and Bob McAdoo, Jawan, all these guys. LeBron loves it. The question for me is, Wade is the giant X. Bosh is going to take whatever they tell him they want to pay him. The question for me is Wade, and how much money he wants to make and how much he feels like his body has left. Because this could be – we've seen it. We saw T-Mac's body break down, right? In 2008, it would have been inconceivable that T-Mac was no longer going to be a relevant player a year later. And then he wasn't. So, I don't know what they do. Let's talk about the other series quickly because I don't know what the F is going on in that series. I thought OKC was winning last night. Instead, San Antonio comes out. Ginobili was the Ginobili, Duncan, Popovich triangle of just leadership and pride was unstoppable. What did you see?
They were brilliant. All things considered, I guess they blew the crap out of Dallas in Game 7 of the first round. That felt like sort of the dam was breaking before that a little bit. They killed Portland. They have a million good regular season and finals wins. That considering how much Oklahoma City is in their head, and I don't think that's an insult. The Spurs players talk about it. They talk openly about the challenges of Oklahoma City. To come out and do that was maybe their most impressive win of the last couple of years. They were absolutely brilliant, both ends of the floor, but particularly offensively. Nobody held the ball. Everybody made quick decisions, even guys that are not necessarily comfortable, just getting the ball and driving right away, made quick decisions and finished hard. And they went up at Ibaka and Perkins, even though they were probably scared about getting their shot block. And like Diaw had a crazy reverse layup finish. Other guys finished around the rim. They were tremendous. And they did some little X's and O's things that worked. Kawhi Leonard on Russell Westbrook was a nice touch by them. But they just played out of their minds. That was a fantastic game.
So let's talk about what they did differently other than play harder and better. They started Bonner, a little less splitter, a little more Kawhi and Westbrook. What else did they do?
Well, it's not even it was Bonner, and it was splitting up Splitter Duncan, as you say. And that I thought they would do that, and they would do it by more Diaw than starting Bonner. But they kind of did both. And it's funny, in my preview for the series, which was mostly about Ibaka, I wrote that watching them on film against the Thunder, I almost thought that I didn't think they could play a Splitter and Duncan together. And I almost deleted that sentence because it seemed too extreme to say that, that the front line you've started all season may have to be vaporized for this series. But I left it in. I'm glad I left it in because it was correct. And so separating those two was big. And I just thought they did smart things to take advantage of some of the aggression that Oklahoma City has on defense. So you'd see Manu and Splitter run a pick and roll, and Perkins or Adams would stupidly trap Manu 35 feet from the basket, which is what they do. Right. And Manu would try and get the ball to Splitter on the roll, but if he couldn't, they would make sure that he had a release valve parallel to him on the perimeter that he could pass immediately to, and then that guy can make the triangle pass to the roll man. So it's like a two pass sequence, and they set that up and just killed them with it repeatedly. We hadn't seen as much of that. But other than that, they just played. I mean, Pop's message to just get the ball and freaking go. It was obvious that they pushed hard in transition. They got a bunch of early buckets in transition. They were, sometimes there's no science to it. Sometimes you're just better, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at the box score right now, and the problem for OKC fundamentally is that they didn't get home court. I think their role guys are just better at home, and the fact that they slipped up just a tiny bit for whatever reason, and San Antonio ascended and caught fire at the perfect time. The Westbrook injury obviously didn't help in any sense, but their inability to get that 1 seed puts those role players that I don't really trust. And I was thinking about it last night. I was like, who do I trust that's out there other than the best 3 guys? They put Jeremy Lamb out there. Do I trust Jeremy Lamb to have big moments in San Antonio?
Jeremy Lamb he's been so bad defensively that it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't play the next game. Even though they need him. I
don't think he can.
Even though they need him, especially if they go small, which they should do more if Bonner starts. They need all the wings they can get, but he has been unplayable defensively.
And you have Fisher and Butler, who, if you play those guys together, suddenly you've killed your entire athletic advantage. You have Cephalosha, who's just in a free fall. What happened to that guy? And it's just like you just go down the line. Well, that guy, Perkins, and then you need at least 5 to win a road game, a road playoff game in San Antonio if they're playing well. And then I don't think they have 5. I think they have 4. They never really figured out who that 5th guy was. They're putting a lot of pressure on Steven Adams right now, who's a little better than I thought he was going to be. I got to say, I've been mildly impressed by him in these playoffs. I don't know if he's ever going to be like a franchise center or anything like that, but I do think he's going to be a piece. And I wasn't sure I thought that 3 months ago, but Lamb obviously just – I don't know. I don't know what they do, Zach.
Who's the captain of the I've cost myself untold millions of dollars? Is it Evan Turner or Thabo Cephalosha for the play? I think it has to be Evan Turner, but because Cephalosha was never going to be paid that much. But some team might have been 3-14 for Cephalosha. I could talk myself into that. Now it's veterans minimum for Cephalosha. That sounds good. Evan Turner, I don't know what the hell's going to happen to him, but they are the co-captains, I think, of the disastrous playoff money costing team.
This is we should at least come up with a starting 5. I feel like Lance is on that team. Because it's not like Lance has played badly, but he's been so erratic emotionally and so crazy in so many different ways. I just can't imagine Dallas being like, hey, we have cap space. Let's get that guy.
But here's what he's got going for him. His own team wants him. That's all he's got going for him in this discussion. And he's young and talented. But, yeah, the rest of the league is scared of him. Other guys, I don't know who the other guys would be.
I'm not as positive that his own team wants him. Let's have that conversation after this series ends.
That's fair. I'm trying to think of other candidates for this. I'd have to go through all the rosters. I mean, who's a free agent on the Clippers? I don't think anyone relevant.
Well, I'm looking at all the playoff dudes. So I certainly think Brook Lopez's value was higher heading into the playoffs than it was afterwards, right?
Well,
might be our center.
That's all health dependent. I mean, Jordan Crawford, by not playing and just almost completely falling out of the rotation, he might be a candidate. They had high hopes for him when they got him, and it didn't really work out. Yeah, we could go through and make a decent team out of it for sure.
Is there anyone at Memphis?
If only Tayshaun Prince were a free agent.
Let's make him a free agent and put him on the team. We need him.
We don't need to know. He doesn't need to get picked on anymore.
I don't know if Ariza made himself more money or not, because he was good in that first series, and then in the second series he gradually faded away. But by the way, the Ernie Grunfeld, Randy Whitman duo is coming back for 3 more years. I was taunting my 2 Wizard friends that I know, Andrew Sharp and Joe House, about it. They were ornery. They were so upset. It's wow, 3 more years just because we beat a team that didn't have Derrick Rose and Luol Deng in round 1, and then kind of almost sort of maybe thought about beating a imploding Pacers team in round 2, but it didn't happen.
Well, that's what's interesting.
It was aggressive.
It's interesting because you look at the team and you're like, I don't really know, unless you really are creative and you have a mandate to be creative, I don't know what else they're supposed to do but bring the band back together. But even as they're doing it and understanding it, you're like, well, this is obviously not going to work out. In like 3 years, this is not going to go. And the East is going to get, Detroit's going to get a real coach. Brooklyn is going to do whatever. They're going to remain competitive. The Knicks will probably bounce back a little bit. Who else? I mean, Derrick Rose, he might get healthy. Cleveland, we don't know what they're going to do. Atlanta's going to get healthy. Charlotte just walked into the number 9 pick in the draft. I mean, the East is going to be a little better next year.
You might have Kevin Love on the Celtics.
Easy now.
Just throwing it out there. Out of all those teams you mentioned, I think Charlotte is the most interesting one to me from an upside standpoint. Because I really think, like, let's say Indiana loses to Miami tonight. That could be the end of the run for them. And it's not like they're going to suck next year, but they had a 3-year window here. You wrote about it a few days ago. They're going to play – this will be their 18th playoff game against Miami, and they couldn't beat them. And they have less of a chance to beat them next year because there's really no way they can improve their team. So unless Paul George becomes a super-duper-duper star, they're not in the ballgame anymore against Miami. But I look at Charlotte. That number 9 pick – there's a lot of good guys on the market right now. Could that number 9 pick and something else get them Al Horford? Could that number 9 pick get Paul Millsap? Could it get them Rondo? Could it get them Aaron Aflalo? There's ways that they could add a really, really good David West type semi-veteran or veteran to what they have already, along with they have a ton of cap space. I think they're like $30 million under.
Not quite that much. Not quite that much. About 15.
Oh, is that all it is?
Well, they're at like 45 for next season or 43, and then now they have 2 picks. They only have 1 pick. I'm sorry, because their own pick goes to Chicago.
Right.
I think I'd have to check that. But they have a 9 pick you got to factor in. But yeah, they've got cap room. But I agree with you. The way for them to I don't really see a huge amount of upside on their roster unless MKG makes a leap. He's one of the wild cards. I think the trade route is how they would have to really make a serious leap. And Horford, look, I mean, it was no one really reported it, but he was quietly put out there at the trade deadline in a very targeted fashion. You actually reported it a couple weeks ago. Nobody did at the time. I love Al Horford, man. If you can get Al Horford, you should get Al Horford. Injuries aside, and whatever. He's a really good player. I think you're too down on Indiana. I think the improvement is that the guys are still young. That Lance and Paul George and maybe Hibbert, but probably just the first 2, still have a development to make. But they're not as good as Miami. They may never be.
You're more bullish on Lance than I am. I think that's the difference. Is I feel like Lance is just a ticking time bomb, and I don't know. I just think something's off with that guy. And once you're in with that guy for 3 years, $27 million or whatever it is, then that's your team. You have no first round pick. You have no cap space. So how are you going to add anybody?
Well, and what people are worried about is that he locks in that deal and he has no incentive to be on good behavior. And if this is good behavior, people don't want to see what $9 million a year guaranteed behavior is like.
There was a sneaky article on ESPN.com the other day that I didn't think got enough attention as it should have gotten by Brian Windhorst and Mike Wells, I think. And it detailed a lot of the Lance stuff that we'd been hearing, but it was interesting to see it all put in one place about just how bad of an effect Lance had on the Pacers in the last 3 months of the regular season. And also stuff like jumping over his own teammates' backs for rebounds, counting stats. And it really, to me, put a lot of the – we always talked about what is the pie chart of what the F is going on with the Pacers. Reading all the stuff Lance did those last 3 months, it changed the pie chart for me. Clearly he was the biggest issue they had. And I don't know. The other thing we were talking about possible contenders for that kind of spot, that number 2 spot to the Miami, assuming Miami brings everyone back. If Washington doesn't bring Ariza and Gortat back, and they just say, you know what, this is a marathon, not a sprint. We're going to have a lot of cap space coming up. Kevin Love's a free agent in a year, and his dad used to play here, and his middle name is Wesley after Wes Unseld. That could be a long-term contender too. They could just sign him a year from now.
Yeah,
I think they're going to screw it up by paying Reese and Gortat, and they're going to be stuck with that team. But if they were smart, I would just – they're not going to win the title next year. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Build around Wall and Beal and build around that cap space and make the right moves with it. Don't make your team in July. So I think they're in there, and I think Charlotte. The Celtics, only if they just go for it and they make a run at Love and Ashik and they really try to just – make something happen. I don't see the Pistons turning around right away, though. Do you think with Josh Smith and Brandon? To me, that's not. I can't think about them until year 3 of that Van Gundy era.
I think they could be look, and they may shake up the roster. We don't know what Stan's going to do yet. With Greg Monroe's free agency and all that, but I think if they were, first of all, they gave up toward the end of the season in order to try and keep their pick, and the basketball gods frowned upon that and punished them.
Yep.
So they're not as bad as 29 and 53. They're close to that bad. I think if the East has a year where it's 40 wins to get into the playoffs, that they could be in the conversation for the 8th seed next season. That's that 8th, 7th, something around there. I don't see them as a threat to make the kind of jump you're talking about.
And then the 2 wild cards, Rose, if he comes back for the Bulls and he's Derrick Rose again, has to be mentioned. They're also a Kevin Love option if Gibson and Mirotic and the picks are enough. They could be in that number 2 spot next year. And we're legally contracted to mention the Raptors just because their fans will send us a slew of emails about how we hate Toronto and we suck and we're awful and why didn't we mention them. They did win 48 games last year. They do have cap space. They're bringing Kyle Lowry back. And they have, I don't think they're a real contender, but they have some pieces in place. They could become the next Indiana with one more trade. I mean, we can't rule them out, right?
It would take one more trade. It would take one more trade. And I do believe they'll bring Lowry back, and that eats up a lot of their cap room, although they can buy out John Salmons for $1 million and open more of it that way. But I don't see what the next piece for them is going to be. I mean, they'll kick some things around. They also have to think about what they want to do with Grievous Vasquez, who I know they like a lot. So they may end up having no cap room. I don't know. But yeah, they're all these teams. Look, it's hard to talk about the Spurs and Thunder and then sit here and get excited about these other teams. But they're all there. They're all going to be okay next year. It's just a matter of who stays healthy and who hits a little unexpected free agency. But the Wiz are fascinating. Everything you just said is true, and that's where ownership really comes into play, because I think Ted Leonsis just wants to win and is not going to squander the good vibes that they had. And Ariza and Gortat are good players. I don't mean to demean them. They're very good players, but they're also either 30 or approaching 30. And there's a very good chance that their contracts are going to end up looking not great. I don't know what else you do. If you want to win, if you want to win immediately and be good and have the fans come, it's just a hard world to navigate.
I got to say one more thing about the Raptors, and I know this is going to end up on whatever the Raptors blog is, and they're going to get excited about it, and the commenters are initially going to like it, then they're going to turn on me, and probably you just by proxy. Masai is a Jedi. He just pulls off. It just happens with him. He just makes teams do things that they shouldn't do. Couldn't you see them trading DeRozan to Charlotte for the number 9 pick? And something, and Gerald Henderson or somebody, it doesn't seem like a good trade on paper, but then all of a sudden they have the number 9 pick, and it turns out statistically Gerald Henderson's better in all these different ways than DeRozan. And I could totally see them using DeRozan as a trade piece, even though that, you would think well, why would they do that? He made he made the All-Star team. He's a good. I could see him turning DeRozan into some sort of asset that brings back way more than he's worth, right?
He's a fascinating trade chip. He's been in trade talks before. That's not surprising, especially since they contemplated – it's hard to remember this, but they thought about tanking 6 months ago. He has an okay contract. It's $9.5 million every year for the next 2 years, and then an option for 16, 17. So you can fit him into a lot of deals without much of a problem. They love him. He's young. He's a great kid. He works his ass off. So he has some institutional value. But I agree. This is a very high trade. Might be as high as his trade value gets. I think he's a good NBA player. I don't think he's a great NBA player. I think he's one of those players that some GMs think is better than he actually is. But again, he's still pretty young. It wouldn't surprise me at all if we heard his name in trade talks. Not at all.
It just seems like a very Masai move where you're like, whoa, they traded DeMar DeRozan? What? And then all of a sudden you look at it and it's like, man, he did it again. How did he do it? How did he know?
Well, it won't be with the Knicks, I'll tell you that much. They could offer DeMar DeRozan to the Knicks for like 4 different things and, a horrible deal for the Raptors. And James Dolan would be like, not him. Not him again. I'm not dealing with that guy again. Hang up.
Last thing, have you heard any other teams for sale potentially after this Clippers $2 billion?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. I have a Sterling Eclipse piece that it may be already posted. I don't know. That's one of the things that people are floating around is like, franchise values are escalating to these wild places, and everyone just assumes the ride is going to go on forever. But like there's sort of the other way of thinking that I've heard from a lot of sort of agents and people who would broker these kind of deals, financial advisors, is like, if you're just like, you got to be looking at these figures and being like, if I'm Herb Simon, like what? I could get $800 million for the Pacers? Like, what? I know the franchise is going to escalate, but seriously? Jerry Reinsdorf, like I could get $1.75 billion for the Bulls. I mean, the Buss family will never sell the Lakers because it's against their father's wishes. But like, I would be, if I were a Buss sibling, I'd be the kid being like, this is our whole business. We could get $4 billion for it right now, and I could just sail around the world on a yacht for the rest of my life. Like, can we at least think about this? I do think we'll hear some stories, and it may just be minority owners who own small slices of teams here or there. But like, you got to start. And again, the franchise values are going to go up, so it may not be till 2017 when the TV deal kicks in and they really go up. But I do think we'll hear rumblings. Maybe you disagree with me that I think we'll hear rumblings of owners being like, I can't pass up I can't pass up the profit now. I bought this team for $200 million. I can sell it for $1 billion. Like, maybe I don't care if I can sell it for $1.2 billion if I wait. Like, maybe I just want to sell it.
Yeah, and Ramon and I talked about this in part 2. I think there's 7 teams that matter as brands, and then there's the other 23, depending on the size of the market. But ultimately, like, they're not the same kind of brand value that the 2 LA teams have, the 2 New York teams, Chicago, the Warriors because of San Francisco and Silicon Valley. I'm looking at those 7 first. And I think the Bulls and Celtics, very conceivable both of those teams could be on the market at some point soon. Because you look at what they paid for the Celtics and what they could turn that profit into. And considering they just won 6 years ago, so it's not like, hey, no, we're in this until we win a title. They already won the title. They named the company that bought the Celtics Banner 17. They won Banner 17. So could they cash out now for $1.7 billion? They have to think about it. And if you're Reinsdorf, you won 6 titles. You don't totally like owning the Bulls because you never go in the luxury tax, really. You try to avoid it as much as you can, even though you're in the number 3 TV market. Maybe you cash out. Could you get $2.3 billion for the Bulls from some, maybe like Yao Ming and his group of Asian investors or whatever? They want to buy the Bulls. That brand means something in China, or whatever. That the Bulls are a brand. And I don't know what that brand's worth, but I know the Clippers just went for $2 billion, and the Bulls have to be worth more than them. Memphis, I think you got to look at. I think the Philly guys are guys that flip teams because that's what they do for a living. They flip assets. You could say they flip. Detroit's another one. So, I think everybody's looking at it.
Philly, and look, I just want to make clear, this is just speculation. This is nothing I've heard. I'm just throwing out theories like this. But Philly is the exact example that you look at, right? You got all these private equity guys who come in from a world where, although they are a little bit more sort of long-term holding than some guys, but they come in, they make a profit, they get out. They bought the Sixers for $280 million. Like, what if someone went to them and was like, Philadelphia, big city, just had the rookie of the year, blah, 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 going to get better. How about $1 billion? And I know they don't want to sell the team. They love owning the team. They own the Devils. They're looking at other sports ventures to get into. They love the whole arena. But if someone comes to you with $1 billion check on something you paid 1/3 of that for, 1/4 of that for, like, I have a conversation with that person.
Well, another one to look at, I think, is the New Orleans. The Bensons had to be dragged into that basically by the league. They did it to save basketball in New Orleans more than that they really want to own a team. I don't really think they want to own an NBA team. They got it for a steal of a price. Now they have Anthony Davis on the team. And that's also a team that's a possible move candidate down the road. What's that team worth? just Anthony Davis we both think he's your best bet to be the next MVP after Durant and LeBron stop passing it back and forth. So what's that team worth? Do you get to own the team that has Anthony Davis on it?
I mean,
if you have $20 billion, I mean, come on.
The Bucks just sold for $550 million. They have nothing of value on the roster in terms of anything like Davis. The owners had to contribute money to a new arena. They had to sign a covenant that says we will never move from Milwaukee. So there's no hope of moving from there. And it was $550 million. That's freaking crazy. It's the largest sale ever of an NBA team before the Clippers sale.
Yeah, I would be if you and I had $20 billion and we wanted a team, I would be making all these calls right now. Like after the Clippers, people are ready. All right, so who do we target? Do we go small market? Do we go medium market? Do we go big market? Do we want a team that has a huge asset on it? Do we want a team that's just got a bunch of picks and potential? How do we play it? And I would look at the entire league and I would concentrate on New Orleans. I'd be like, we could own the team that has Anthony Davis on it. And I bet they'll want to sell. And we'll get in. We'll just make them an offer they can't refuse. And now we own Anthony Davis's team.
Here's my worry.
Team I went for.
Here's my worry, though. I want to be in the Anthony Davis business with you. I want to be your assistant GM or something. My worry about New Orleans is that there's a casino right in the middle of the city, and we're going to lose you to the casino, and you're going to go off the rails, and I'm going to have to manage the team on my own. That's my worry.
Well, you have that built into your deal. If Harris ruins me, you get to take over the majority ownership. That's how we'll rig it.
But now you're setting me up to set you up. Now you're setting me up. Oh yeah, I had to schedule this team function at the casino for some reason. Now you're setting me up now.
Yeah, maybe we're better off going after one of the safer cities, like Phoenix.
I was going to say let's buy Phoenix from Sarver. Good GM. We both know the GM. We like them. Good city. It's warm there. Whatever. Good history. Let's buy Phoenix.
All right. So all we need now is the $1.4 billion it's going to take to get the Suns. Any billionaires out there, give us a call. Bill Simmons and Zach Lowe open for business. Zach, enjoy the game tonight. Enjoy the game tomorrow night. I feel like that series is going 7. Look forward to reading you this week or next week on Grantland, and we will see what happens.
Enjoy the games.
All right. Talk to you. That's it for the BS Report 3-parter. Check out NBA Countdown Friday night, 7:30. If there is a Game 7, we'll be there Sunday, and the final starts June 5th. Enjoy the weekend. Thanks for listening.
Target percent off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNRadio.com.
Peace out.
Gotta say, Golick, great call on grabbing Subway for lunch and getting guacamole on our subs.
Told you this new guac really amps up the flavor.
Yep, something adding up. Things can be great. Guacamole on your sub, a new co-host to replace you.
What was that?
Oh, no, nothing.
Subway now has deliciously rich new guacamole made from ripe Hass avocados with just a hint of garlic, onion, and jalapeno. Discover how new guacamole turns up the flavor on any of your freshly made favorites. Subway, eat fresh.